Let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at the rapidly shifting realities of gigawatt-scale battery energy storage systems, or BESS. To put that scale into perspective, just 1 gigawatt can power roughly 750,000 homes. We already know these massive storage projects are absolutely crucial. They're the linchpin for stabilizing our future power grids. But, well, there's a huge disconnect happening in development pipelines right now. We're seeing major, incredibly well-funded projects just grinding to an absolute halt. And honestly, it's not for the reasons most people in the industry think. So today, we're going to unpack exactly what's actually choking these pipelines, and more importantly, how the most successful developers out there are pivoting to fix it.
Okay, so let's tackle a massive industry misconception right off the bat. Everyone seems laser-focused on the myth that hardware supply chains are the problem. Cell supply issues, inverter lead times, but they are completely missing the real threat here. The reality, the true stalling point has shifted entirely to local friction. We're talking land acquisition and zoning bottlenecks. Look, you can have all the lithium cells and advanced inverters in the world sitting there ready to ship, but if you don't actually have the legal right to place them on a specific piece of dirt, well, your project is basically dead in the water.
Which brings us to Section 1, the true BES bottleneck.
The fundamental error we're seeing across the industry really boils down to this idea: treating site selection as a simple real estate transaction rather than a complex political and regulatory hurdle is literally the fastest way to choke a development pipeline. Seriously, developers are walking into local municipalities thinking, hey, we're just buying dirt. They think it's all about the money and signing the deed, but it's not. It's a highly complex political hurdle. You are stepping right into a regulatory maze, and if you don't treat it with the political nuance it actually requires, you're going to choke your own pipeline before it even gets off the ground.
Let's move into Section 2, spatial and grid constraints.
So developers face what we call this demanding trifecta. You can't just put these systems out in the middle of nowhere, right? But obviously, you also can't drop them next to a downtown coffee shop. You have to satisfy 3 incredibly demanding constraints all at the exact same time: multi-hectare plots, direct high-voltage access, and close proximity to urban or industrial load centers. Finding a location that gives you massive rural space, but also downtown-level infrastructure, it's kind of like looking for a unicorn that also happens to be a certified electrician. It narrows down your viable map to almost nothing. And when we say multi-hectare plots, you really need to visualize the reality on the ground here. We are not talking about a small utility shed or a single transformer. We're talking about multi-acre container parks. Just imagine rows and rows of massive shipping containers totally filled with batteries, stretching across the equivalent of a dozen football fields. When project developers drop blueprints of that massive scale on the desks of local planning authorities, those officials are just completely overwhelmed. They literally don't have the zoning categories or the historical precedent to easily process an infrastructure project with a spatial footprint this huge.
And that leads us to Section 3, zoning and local pushback. What's happening here is a classic unstoppable force meets an immovable object scenario. You've got these immense gigawatt-scale BESS needs, massive land requirements, right up against urban or industrial zones, crashing headfirst into fierce community pushback. Because developers are essentially encroaching on protected lands, they trigger intense agricultural zoning defenses from farming communities, massive environmental resistance, and just severe municipal stalling across the board. It transforms what really should be a standard infrastructure upgrade into this highly protracted legal battleground.
And the fallout from this collision? It's devastating for our energy grid. Because of this protracted legal battleground, local resistance is stalling grid connection approvals long before a single shovel ever hits the dirt. Just think about all the capital tied up in these pipelines. The hardware might be 100% ready, the funding might be completely secured, but because that local zoning friction hasn't been solved, grid connections are just completely blocked. The whole project is frozen in bureaucratic amber, entirely because those local political hurdles were underestimated.
So, how do we fix this? Section 4, strategic permitting frameworks. To break through this bottleneck, developers absolutely have to adopt a completely new playbook. Step 1 is strategic site selection. This means you have to deeply analyze land use conflicts and zoning bottlenecks before you ever even make an offer. Step 2 is community engagement. Look, you can't fight agricultural and environmental resistance in the dark. You have to proactively bring the community to the table early on. And Step 3, navigate local zoning politics. You've got to treat municipal planners as actual partners in a complex regulatory process, not just clerks stamping a permit. You have to actively work with them to manage the overwhelming footprint of these multi-acre container parks. So I want to leave you with this.
Whether you're a land acquisition strategist, a project developer, or a municipal planner, how are you navigating local zoning pushback and transmission proximity constraints in your current pipeline development? Are you still treating these sites like simple real estate transactions, or are you actually adopting the strategic frameworks needed to clear these complex political hurdles? The future of our gigawatt-scale grid really depends entirely on how well you answer that question. Thanks for joining me in this explainer to uncover the true bottlenecks of BESS deployment and keep questioning the conventional wisdom.